I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Dean Detloff, and I am your intro to Bible instructor.
And I'm Matt Bernico. I'm the guy teaching you how to pick up chicks with the Bible. Just kidding. I would never do that. That's
what a class.
Terrible. I know. That's my class. I don't want to teach it, but they're making me.
Right. Yeah, what a wild syllabus that must be. I don't know how to ask you about it.
Nope, please don't.
I do, but off air.
Yeah, of course.
So by the time you're hearing this episode, it's International Workers' Day. It's not today, but we're ready. We're anticipating it. Not today when we're recording it, that is.
Breaking out my International Workers' Day advent calendar.
That's right. How we'll celebrate, who could say? I'm going to tune into a live stream of people that would be here in Toronto, I guess. And I'm looking forward to it.
That's cool.
Yeah. Yep. It's the United May Day. I'm actually pretty bummed. I think, I don't know, coronavirus is tough. It's tough to not be able to demonstrate and all that kind of thing. But I almost said United Methodist Day. United May Day is one of my favorite days of the year in Toronto because it is such a really interesting tableau of the state of the left, for better and for worse. And I like to be part of it. And this year, I guess I'll have to watch it on my TV screen. Are you doing anything for May Day, Matt?
No, I don't think so. I'm going to be tweeting angrily about things, like I usually do. CPUSA is having a May Day dance party. I don't know what that means, and I'm probably not going to do it, but I just want to say it is happening.
Great.
Yeah. So it's cool.
Good.
You know what? You should, all you fellow travelers out there, send us a letter, not a real one, but a digital, an email that tells us how you're gonna celebrate May Day and what you're doing. We'd love to hear from you. We don't get enough user feedback, and we need more of it. So just tell us what's going on. Strike up a conversation.
We have been getting some. We always get a slow trickle of very, very kind and thoughtful people reaching out and saying what they think and telling us what they what's catching them and what's not in the podcast, and we do appreciate it. So you could be one of those people too.
Some people say they hate Reddit goofs. Some people say they love Reddit goofs. Man,
it's tough.
We can't win.
It's tough to sort out, isn't it? We're going to come back to what we're actually talking about, but this is actually maybe a good moment to say, if you miss the Reddit group, the Reddit goofs, you can still find them, but you have to pay at least $1 for them to listen to them on our Patreon. We've moved them there with some current events stuff that we're talking about on a secret lock-in podcast, as we call it. So you can find that at patreon.com/themagnificast. All right, that's probably enough self-promotion.
Yes.
Back to May Day. Okay, May Day, if you don't know, May 1st is the day that people on the left historically celebrate workers' power. You might know about Labor Day, but that was created as a competitor to May Day, which is the real workers' holiday.
That's right.
It all
Labor
goes
Day
back
sucks.
to
I hate it.
I know, it's a bad one. It's a bad one where it's basically a holiday for grilling, and that's not what you want.
No.
May Day goes back to the commemoration of the Haymarket affair, or the Haymarket riot, or rebellion, or whatever you want to say, in Chicago in 1886. It started off as a demonstration for an 8-hour workday, but it all went to hell pretty quick when somebody threw a bomb. Nobody really knows who did it. The cops infamously killed a ton of people in response to that bomb, so some people suggest that the cops threw the bomb in order to create a pretext for violence. Other people say something else. I don't know. You can figure that out. Importantly, though, afterward, basically without any real evidence, the state hanged 4 people: George Engel, Adolf Fischer, Albert Parsons, and August Spies. And ever since then, communists, anarchists, and socialists of all kinds have celebrated workers on May 1st. So in the past, we've talked about how some Christians of this time were involved in the Haymarket affair and radical politics in the Gilded Age. There's more than you might think. If you're interested in that, you can go back and look for our episodes with Heath Carter, a really great historian in particular, who's helped us think about that. But this time, we're going to do a deep dive on a Christian who was on the other side of things, the bad side of things, Dwight Lyman Moody.
If you've never heard of Dwight Moody, you're lucky. If you've never heard of the Moody Bible Institute, you're also lucky. But you can think of him as like an evangelical saint, or like a past pope of evangelicalism. He was a big deal. So Dwight Moody was an evangelical before there were evangelicals, during when they were fighting whether they should be called evangelicals or fundamentalists or whatever is going on with Christianity. But interestingly enough, the Moody Bible Institute shares a pretty weird and secret history with the Haymarket affair. You never would guess.
The History Channel episode of the Magnificast.
That's right. That's exactly what we're doing. So we thought we should take a look at that history as well as some of Moody's ideas surrounding evangelism and the poor, and think about how that origin is still with us in evangelicalism today. Overall, like, figuring out what it means to be a Christian on the left means figuring out the ways that Christianity and capitalism have worked together to create really oppressive and reactionary types of politics. And there's no better example than Dwight L Moody.
I think that's right. I think that it's okay. You might ask yourself, "Hey, it's the day, the high holy day of the left. Why are you talking about such a huge nerd like D.L. Moody?" And the reason is, like Matt said, it's important if you're a Christian on the left to figure out how we're complicit. But also, it is a fascinating kind of event that spurs on a kind of tradition of Christianity being tied to capitalism and encourages us to ask some critical questions. So it's a good excuse to do that. If you don't know who Moody is, we'll get to who he really was. But I think one way into this conversation is to talk about the myth around Moody. So maybe you've never heard of Dwight L. Moody. Like Matt said, if that's the case, then you're very lucky. But if you spend any time in evangelical circles for too long, there's a handful of people that you'll hear about at some point. Just maybe some examples. Maybe these are like extremely Michigan examples. I don't really know. But like someone might at some point get you a devotional by Charles Spurgeon. To give you one example. Or if you say that you like philosophy, then someone will ask you for sure about C.S. Lewis. Moody, though, will definitely come up as soon as somebody starts talking about evangelism. He's taken on a kind of mythical status as like a revivalist. He's maybe like a 19th century Billy Graham. And one good example of this hagiography comes out in Christianity Today, the evangelical magazine. So it ends like this. I'll just read this paragraph, which is a bit long, but I think it gives you a window into just the figure of Moody. So here goes. He used every opportunity to preach. Through his revival work, he saw the need for an army of Bible-trained lay people to continue the work of inner-city evangelism. Quote, "If this world is going to be reached," he said, "I'm convinced that it must be done by men and women of average talent. After all, there are comparatively few people in this world who have great talents." Okay. In 1880, Moody invited adults and college-age youth to the first of many summer Bible conferences at his home in Northfield. These conferences helped nurture dispensationalism and fundamentalism, both of which were just emerging. At one conference, the student volunteer movement was founded by 11 collegians who pledged to work in foreign missions after their college education. a horrible tradition that unfortunately still exists. Finally, in 1886, Moody started the Bible Work Institute of the Chicago Evangelization Society.
Not a great name.
What a name. Renamed Moody Bible Institute shortly before his death, which was one of the first in the Bible school movement. From this work, he launched yet another work, the Cole Portage Association, later Moody Press. Again, not a great namer. That's not what he's known for. An organization using horse-drawn gospel wagons from which students sold low-cost religious books and tracts throughout the nation. Despite a tireless schedule, he preached 6 sermons a day just a month before he died. He left to spend time with his children and grandchildren at their Northfield, Massachusetts farm, where he died. So that gives you kind of an example of just like the place that Moody occupies in the imagination of evangelicals, I think. You know, he's like a person of conviction who cares about the average person figuring out how to be an evangelist. He's preaching all the time. You can't stop him. He won't stop himself. Even till a month before he died, he's preaching 6 times a day. He's got the gospel wagon. He's starting schools. He's starting presses. He's nurturing fundamentalism and dispensationalism. And he comes out looking like this, this person who's totally kind of sold out for like spreading the good word or something like that. So it helps to maybe get an idea of the myth of Moody, to understand why connecting him to the Haymarket affair, as we're about to do, is also extremely wild.
Yeah, man, he is a wild character. I think I first got interested in Moody when I was doing some research on Christian education a while back. Christian education in the United States is, evangelical Christian education. Catholic education is a whole nother gang, but, you can't really tell that story without Dwight L Moody and the Moody Bible Institute. It's such a weird place with a weird theology and sort of ideology behind it. It's hard to really describe. The whole thing is so bizarre. Like, you mentioned just a minute ago, Dean, dispensationalism, and that bit is so important to the way that the Moody Bible Institute works. Basically, you think of, it's no secret that the listenership to our podcast are basically all people who went to evangelical schools, namely in Michigan. But it's the Moody Bible Institute is not right now and was never a school like, Cornerstone or, any other, like Calvin or whatever. It was a place that was specifically there to teach you how to do the Christian work. And what that means is evangelism, really particularly. And like, you didn't go there for a course of study, really. Like, you didn't get a degree. Like, you were just there until you weren't there anymore, because like you never knew when the rapture would come.
Right.
So it's not like you would just like, it's not like, well, no, I have my bachelor's degree in evangelism. It's like you were just there until you weren't there anymore. It's like, it's this wild, the Moody Bible Institute is wild. Like, on the one hand, it is this kind of like interesting sort of democratic experiment in Christian education. On the other hand, it's bad. So there's that. So anyways, we have this like these myths about Dwight Moody and like what he's about and like, his whole thing, right? But who's the real Moody? This is the History Channel version again. So like, he's a hard person to explain for a lot of reasons. He's invested.
Wait. Just to set up the History Channel aesthetic here. If everybody could just like close your eyes for a minute, imagine like Google on your phone really quickly a picture of Dwight L Moody, and then just imagine it's like slightly animated, and then like close your eyes and keep that image in your brain as Matt talks just for the next minute or two.
That's right. So he was really successful evangelical force throughout the United States in the late 19th century. He's really well known for, like I said, the Moody Bible Institute, which is just like this huge evangelical training grounds for mission work and evangelism. But he's really integral to like the story of Chicago during this time and the Haymarket riots and politics and evangelicalism writ large. So yeah, he is an active figure in Chicago around the same time as the Haymarket affair, the 1880s, that whole time. He was there before that, he was there after that, all this kind of stuff. We can't get into the weeds too much, but I'm going to try to give the short version of the story. So yeah, like I said, he'd end up benefiting the Haymarket affair in some interesting ways. But before the Moody Bible Institute, he was just like this well-known evangelist, revival figure, like a 19th century Billy Graham is probably right. Moody's main appeal was to like upper and middle class types people. Like that's the people who were coming out to his revival meetings, not the poor and working class. Upper class people, middle class people. Moody was obviously okay with this because it provided like a big base of donors to his cause, which is nice to have.
The organ grinder needs those deep pockets.
That's right. That's exactly right. But in that, he recognized that the working class were the folks that who needed like the gospel message, especially. There's this like really, I mean, we'll talk about this more towards the end of the episode, but there's this really yucky, like anti-working class like ideology going on here. Those are the people who are uneducated, who are brutish and nasty, and they need someone to tell them how to live an upright life. And that's what Dwight Moody thought he could do. And that's like also there's like a real conservatism in that type of thinking. Like, you just have to teach poor people to live the right way. And if you do that, then they'll be, less gross to you or something. And that sort of like that element of his preaching was like really appealing to the upper class folks. And that's why so many of them were very on board. Right. Because it was a type of sort of theological thinking and ideology that said like rich people, you're doing everything right, and poor people, you can be like rich people if you just kind of follow these rules.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real. You can already see the ways that capitalism habituates you into thinking about yourself and other people, right? Like, there's a kind of Christian paternalism here, like you were saying, Matt. Like, poor people are poor because they're brutish or there's something wrong with them, and if only they could understand maybe the saving light of the gospel or something, they could clean up and get a job and be a good business person or something like that, which is in some ways the story of D.L. Moody, right? At least that's how he kind of narrated his own story to himself, it seems. And I think that is important too, because first of all, it shows you how capitalism trains you to think about people who are dispossessed by the economy, right? Like you read that as their fault. But it also shows that Christians have found like Christian reasons to feel that way for a very, very long time. So it's a tough like ideological nut to crack.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very tough. And it's definitely one that like Dwight Moody and the rest of the sort of Chicago bourgeoisie were not self-reflective enough to understand. Yeah, I mean, so Moody's thing is that he wants to bring the good news to the working class. But unfortunately for Moody, the working class weren't super interested in that. I mean, some of them, of course, were. But he had a hard time getting working people to come to his revivals. There's to kind of prepare for some of this, I did some research in Timothy Glegg's book called Guaranteed Pure, which is a book about D.L. Moody. And he notes that sometimes like women and mothers would come to, working class families would come, but they could never really get the men to come, which is, I don't know. It seems like a trope that plays out all too often in Christianity, but anyways, that's what you get. Timothy Glegg, again, the historian that I'm referencing here, and we'll reference throughout the rest of this episode. He does a really good job kind of explaining the way that Moody's gospel is framed around a certain type of bourgeois individualism. It glorified businessmen, disparaged working class people. That's the whole thing. And there's this whole idea of like Christian work in Moody's thing, in Moody's like theology and evangelistic ideology. There's probably a better word for that, and I can't think of it. But whatever. I'll just keep saying ideology. Missiology? God, I don't know, man. It doesn't matter. But
it's all there.
Yeah. So anyways, this is how Timothy Glegg kind of frames Moody as a person. That kind of helps give you an understanding of like what's going on here. So Moody, hailing from a working class background and with the verbal infelicities to prove it, he could speak to these men, the working class folks, in their own dialect. Yet he hobnobbed with successful businessmen without any apparent resentment. He parroted their economic views in glib declarations, proclaiming that he could not see how a man can follow Christ and not be successful, and that he believed hard work inevitably brought self-sufficiency. Wouldn't it be nice if that were the case? But yeah, I mean, that's Dwight Moody in a nutshell, right? if you just do Christian stuff good enough, if you do the Christian work and you kind of, if you do the Christian work and you're also like a complete idiot about economics and will just say whatever rich people agree with, you'll be really successful. Yeah, that's true. That is probably true.
Right.
This is another funny story that Glegg brings up to kind of demonstrate the tension between the, like holier than thou businessmen of Dwight Moody's class and also working people. This is just like, I don't know, kind of unrelated, but I think it's worth talking about because it's funny. So when business leaders persuaded Mayor Joseph Medal, who was the mayor of Chicago at the time, to enforce Sunday saloon closing, so closing the bars on Sundays, the working classes united across ideological and ethnic lines to elect a leftist People's Party for city government in 1873. It didn't last very long, but like, I think I like that little blurb of a story because it's like, here are these rich people, and they're gonna tell you poor people, how you working class people, how to live a good life, and part of that is not drinking on Sundays, and working class people were so mad that they started their own political party.
Yeah, I love that. One weird thing though about Moody, and especially this feeds into evangelicalism in general, is that at least the way that I've been shaped or was shaped to see him when I was an evangelical is that he was the type of guy who he was like willing to get down and dirty with like the working class and even be a little grimy himself, wink wink. And the idea being like there was a story even in that Christianity Today kind of hagiography where the details are not immediately present to me, but like basically some people, the city or whatever, like somebody said they were gonna stop some stuff from happening at like these fairgrounds or whatever, and Moody was like no, like a bunch of Christians were upset that they were gonna have these events, and Moody was like, no, we've got to go there because like that's the mission field. And that is like such a wild evangelical thing to think, right? Like it's sort of like it gives Moody and other evangelicals this air of like I don't know, being like interesting or radical or something like that because they're willing to put up with like the moral infidelities of the lost if it means that they could be saved, which is just like this strange oscillation between relevance and holiness that you always get in evangelicalism.
Yeah, it's a really good note. It's kind of like Leninism, you just go where the people are.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, unlike Leninism, Dwight Moody, here's another quote from Glegg's book about his way to think about Christianity. So Glegg writes, for Moody, the church, like a business, had no intrinsic value absent its results. Thus, its primary purpose was to coordinate support and encourage its members towards Christian work. So I've mentioned this phrase Christian work a few times, and let me just tell you what it means now. So Christian work for Moody means like converting people and evangelizing to them to this specific type of Christianity, right? Not the social gospel that's kind of happening at the same time and that'll come after this, but a type of really like socially conservative and capitalist friendly gospel. So the Christian work here, it ends up getting taken on by a lot of Dwight Moody's sort of associates. Most notably, this is kind of an interesting story, by this woman named Emma Dreyer. Dreyer is like, she's a person who's like really down with Moody's whole thing. And she basically kind of like works with him to become what Dwight Moody would call a Bible reader. And Bible reading was like a job doing the Christian work. There's so many like stupid words with this, but basically her whole job would be to go to poor neighborhoods, provide some charity where it was needed, whatever that might mean. And then like basically read the Bible to people and make sure they know what the Bible says. And that was it. So the Christian work was that type of evangelism, sort of just dropping into neighborhoods that you don't belong in and reading the Bible to people. I mean, like, it doesn't get really any more parental than that, but that type of Christian work ends up being a big deal for Moody later. So, like when he's talking about, getting grimy with these working class folks, like, that's what he means.
Yeah, right,
like,
right.
Not recognizing their intrinsic worth or like trying to free them from the oppression of capitalism or whatever else is going on, right? But to like read the Bible to them, which is some dumb stuff.
Yeah, it's so fascinating how these kinds of patterns also end up being baked into evangelicalism later, right? Like, I mean, the thing I immediately think of is like missions, where I don't know how many times I've like talked to a conservative Christian who's like, yeah, like our youth group is gonna go build some wells in like Guatemala, and we're really excited about it. And you know what? Like the most important thing is like we're there to build wells, but like we're also there to share the word. And like that's really why we're there. And so it's, like you can only imagine, you know, a bunch of like stupid white Americans like going to Guatemala and like telling all these peasant indigenous Catholics what the Bible says while they like dig them wells, right? Like it's this bizarre kind of contradiction. But yeah, like that's how evangelicalism kind of teaches you to think, and it's helpful to see Moody as a first foray into all that, right? Like he's innovating these kinds of things in many respects, not by himself, but in an outsized kind of way, at least to the point that he becomes remembered in the pantheon of evangelical historical memory, which is important because evangelicals aren't exactly like historically minded by and large. So yeah, anyway, just interesting to kind of note all these weird how these weird like habits continue, you know, 100 years later or so.
That reminds me of a story that I probably shouldn't tell, but I'm going to tell anyways. A long time ago, when I myself, like D.L. Moody, was a part of the Christian education apparatus, I was at this meeting that was it was like an outside group trying to pitch a semester abroad to some students, and a semester abroad, it's fine. But it was like through a Christian program, and they go to specifically countries in the Caribbean and Latin America. And this one colleague of mine, I'm so bitter about this, never mind. But basically they're like, hey, why don't you guys take students to Haiti? Because like they really need to hear the good word. And the guy that was visiting was like, well, what do you mean? Well, because of like the witchcraft there. And the guy, they're just like, what are you talking about? But it's like, you know, it's that same vibe from Moody still exists, right? You're not going to do social, like to work to give people relief in their social lives. You're going to give them spiritual relief. You're trying to save them from the spiritual ills of the world, and that sucks so much ass. I hate it.
Yeah. Well, I think the craziest thing of this whole piece in Moody, though, is all right, so Moody is remembered as a guy who is training people to go, you know, read the Bible to poor people, like work with the working class. But Matt, one thing that you were telling me before we got on this call that I'd like you to talk more about is how like actually Moody did a very bad job of it. I think that's my favorite part of this whole story. Could you maybe walk me through that a little bit again?
Yeah. He had these, he had Bible readers, he had people going to do the Christian work, he was doing the Christian work, but like the working class didn't care. I don't know. It wasn't, you know, I mean, like, I don't want to paint too broad strokes, right? Like, of course this appealed to some people and that's fine. But like, by and large, it did not convert the working class to his specific brand of Christianity. It didn't do the things that he wanted it to do. It kept on appealing to middle class and upper class people. That's, I think, the really important part of the story is that he was trying to, you know, reach these gross poor people so much, but it didn't actually end up panning out. And I think the most illustrative example of this maybe is the way that his life and work coincided with the Haymarket affair. So we're finally getting to this part, the interesting part, the reason we're tuning in. We're really taking these History Channel tactics, to the next level. We're now that you've sat through the boring history and a weird story from me. Now we're going to tell you what you're really here for.
Now it's the Ancient Aliens moment.
That's right. Me with big hair, D.L. Moody. Yeah. So, okay. This entire time, Moody's in Chicago. He's building this, you know, big network of bourgeois Christians, and like they're basically bankrolling his work. All kinds of, if you are familiar with Chicago, I mean, go look at this Timothy Glegg book. All the rich people from Chicago that everything is named after are in it. And they're like all giving D.L. Moody money. So basically he wanted them to give him money to start a school to teach people how to do Christian work. He wanted money to start the Moody Bible Institute, but they were like not super on board with it right away. They were really into his like revival preaching, and like they wanted him to keep doing that. So they're like, okay, Moody, whatever, we'll get to that later. We'll get to your cool school later. But for now, like, what if we just gave you money to do another revival series, and you can bring poor people to it and do your whole thing, and that would be awesome. And Moody's like, fine. Like, it's like a real begrudging moment. Like, he doesn't really want to do this, but he does do it. This is how Glegg describes the whole situation. Whether concerned by denominational opposition or simply averse to the large price tag, Moody's business allies were slow to organize Moody's proposed training institute. Instead, as a consolation, they proposed that Moody hold a May revival campaign on the city's rolling south side, cynically timed to coincide with a threatened general strike for an 8-hour workday. You can see where this is getting awesome.
I just love, like, the idea of a bunch of business people being like, yeah, I've heard about that strike too. Yeah, I don't know what we're going to do. Hey, remember that pastor? Like, can we get him to, like, just try to get everybody out of the city for a minute?
Do you know what angry and tired workers love? Church. That's right. They're not going to go to a strike. They could go to a church meeting. That's awesome.
They love that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So here's where it gets better. It just keeps getting better. Okay, so again, from Glegg's book. The first evening, Moody addressed swaths of empty seats, exhorting the sprinkling of wives and mothers present to bring to the meetings the men who were on strike. So yeah, again, like, wives and mothers showed up, but the men weren't there because they were all on strike. The following day, May 3rd, a massive crowd of 40,000 protesters gathered at the gates of McCormick Factory. McCormick was a person that was funding Moody. So this is before the Haymarket riot, in case you're not tracking. This is on May 3rd. Haymarket,
but like involving many of the people who would be part of the Haymarket riot.
Yeah, totally. This like rolls over into it the next day.
Yeah.
So at this protest at the McCormick Factory, the police killed 4 strikers and injured hundreds more. German anarchists called for a protest at Haymarket Square the next evening and distributed pamphlets with a call to arms. All right. Again, it's just the mounting tension of this story is so great. It's just like Moody is just trying to do this thing, and at the same time, like, in the background, like, people just like screaming. Okay, so this is my favorite line from the entire book. No one remembers May 4th, 1886 from Moody's blistering sermon, which used Noah's flood to remind listeners that God will not allow sin to go unpunished. Rather, the day is noted for a bomb of unknown origin exploding in Haymarket Square. Okay, so this is where things heat up. This is this happens. Like, no one comes to Moody's revival meeting because they're all at this riot. What a terrible but like extremely dark comedy thing. So after the Haymarket riot, this is what Moody says. This is his like response. I'm not speaking disparagingly of different churches and missions now attempting to reach this class, he later told reporters, but anyone with their eyes open can't fail to see that the masses are not reached. One of two things is absolutely certain. Either these people are to be evangelized to, or the leaven of communism and infidelity will assume such enormous proportions that it will break out in a reign of terror such as this country has never known. It don't take a prophet or the son of a prophet to see these things. You can hear the muttering of the coming convulsion even now, if you only open your ears and your eyes. So this is Moody's response. Basically, he's just like, these people need to be at my church. What are they doing? They're falling prey to communism. And then it really interestingly too, though, because like, you know, Haymarket is not the Haymarket riot is not like an individualized event, right? Like there are tons of things leading up to it, all kinds of labor strikes beforehand, all kinds of radicalization beforehand. And Glegg says Moody had made nearly identical comments back in March, but it was only Haymarket that opened the eyes and ears and wallets. So after Haymarket, and Moody says these sort of like scathing critique of the anarchists and communists who made such a big stink of things. That is how Moody got all of his rich benefactors to finally fund the Moody Bible Institute. That's like the thing that did it. It's that like, you know, the Haymarket riot is like this tipping point in like the social order where people finally see like there's something serious going on here. There's all these dispossessed workers, and then Moody's the guy that's just like, well, yeah, but if they come to my church, if we can train enough people to go out and reach these people, and you know, tell them how to live a good Christian life, this won't be a problem anymore, right? So the funny thing about the Haymarket riot is that like that's how Moody makes enough money to open what would be the Moody Bible Institute. And that is the most buck wild story I've ever heard in my entire life.
It is really wild. Yeah, absolutely. It's so strange too. I mean, you mentioned, so the Haymarket affair, the Haymarket riot is a tipping point, and it's a tipping point for both the right and the left, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the left, I mean, there are big events that happened in the 19th century before and after the Haymarket events, but like, it takes on an international significance, so much so that it becomes a holiday all around the world, right? Because of in honor of these martyrs. And at the same time, the right, too, starts to pick up on the fact that, yeah, this is a big deal. And it's so fascinating to see Moody as a financial benefactor of that crisis. As somebody who's like, I don't know, like business savvy, I guess, seeing the writing on the wall, sorting out, you know, that now's the time to make the pitch in the Dragon's Den or whatever, and be like, yeah, you can get all my equity, just pour in right now. This is the time. It's like you're in or out.
Moody's just pitching this to Mark Cuban. This is gonna work.
That's right.
We're gonna start this new school. It's gonna be so good. Yeah, I mean, it is a really good example of the ways evangelicalism is plugged into the machine of capitalism, insofar that it's there to preserve a type of social order, right? It's a type of conservatism that's trying to keep things the same and repress the desires to radically alter society in a way that would benefit more people. Yeah, I mean, it's from my perspective right now, it is such a weird thing to think of like as a legitimate type of Christianity. I mean, of course it is, right? But like thinking that like, yeah, Jesus, a completely, a conservative type of guy. No, not at all. It's just such a bizarre thought. But like, it just, when you kind of combine, that specific hermeneutic of reading the Bible, which is, a very sort of like plain sort of fundamentalist kind of way of reading the Bible, alongside of Christian ideology, it just like works together to make this mechanism that tries to, oppress workers, right? It's complicit in that type of oppression.
Yeah, there's so many strange moving parts to it also, like, so evangelicals so often talk about how, obviously, okay, there's a big political machinery around evangelicalism. So I was about to say evangelicals often talk about being kind of above the fray of politics, and I don't, okay, obviously lots of them don't. So I don't want to be generalized that way for obvious reasons. But a lot of Christians, when you talk to them, and evangelicals in particular, will say something like, saving souls isn't about politics. Like you would save the soul of a communist and a feminist and like a conservative and whoever you could find who doesn't have Jesus. Like you would just save them. And it's sort of explained as though it rises above all of material and worldly conditions or something like that. But when you go back throughout history, it is so consistently on the side of and so consistently being produced by the literal financial interests of capitalists that it is like, it's so interesting to see that as the consummate sort of bourgeois religion, that it's the politics that disavows being political, the kind of spirituality that says that it's above the fray precisely because it thinks that liberalism is above the fray in some kind of strange way. I don't know. It's just interesting to see, like we've talked in the past on this podcast about how even after like the Great Depression, right, that was a turning point for evangelicalism. All of a sudden, these kind of charity gospel preachers or whatever found themselves not on the side of the organized working class, but on the side of the business owners. Like this is such a consistent pattern in history. You see it in Haymarket, you see it in the Great Depression, you see it again, of course, after the 70s, which are a real height of radicalism. Reagan gets elected in the 80s. Like, it's fascinating to see this as a repeated pattern that goes over and over and over again.
Yeah, the way that evangelicalism works within capitalism, it functions like as an idea or as a type of propaganda that's like so good that people don't even recognize it as propaganda, or like at least evangelicals don't, right? It's completely like, under their radar. They don't ever quite catch on to their own bullshit. Yeah.
I mean, I get it. Like there was a time in my life when I thought, to the credit of like normal average evangelicals who aren't in the pocket of big business explicitly, like if you think that people are going to hell unless you talk to them about Jesus, then like, you know, it probably should consume your whole life. It's just like too bad that
if you really believe that
ideological. Yeah, exactly. Like it's too bad that's an ideological construction or reflection of capitalism.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's just so frustrating because, you know, what it means to live a good Christian life does mean, you know, complete compliance to capitalism. But like,
right.
But I guess like what I mean when I say it's propaganda that's so good that you don't even know it's propaganda. I mean, like, you know, they wouldn't even recognize that as being something political, right? Like just showing up for work and not complaining about, you know, your student loans or your boss or whatever like that. You can't do that and be a Christian or whatever, but you know, of course. Here's completely a weird segue. Like, okay, our podcast, it's known for having bad segues. I don't think it's known by other people for that. I think it's just known by us for that. But I'm going to dive into that part of our brand really hard here because I need to tell this story. It doesn't really fit into this story particularly, but it needs to be told. So I was talking a little bit earlier about the weirdness of Moody Bible Institute and like kind of how it functioned as a school. This is a story I found when I was doing some of this research on Christian higher ed, and it's amazing. So it comes from this book written by Adam Latz called Fundamentalist U, and it's basically a history of like these type of weird evangelical schools. Lots of good histories in here about Bob Jones and Liberty, and also Moody Bible Institute. It's a huge part of it. So this is a really fun story that at least it's kind of on brand for our podcast. It's about Moody Bible Institute. It's connected in these vague ways, and you just have to listen to it or turn the podcast off. You choose. It's not my problem. So anyways, there's this like whole section in this book about how students have broken the rules at Christian universities, and it's a joyful and amazing history. It's basically just a chapter about how some students they'd rat on one another and like be like, oh man, that guy had a grill in his room. And then other parts are about how like these students were drinking. It's amazing. Anyways, this is my favorite rule breaking story about Moody Bible Institute. For some earnest students, their behavior represented religious dissent, not merely hedonistic excess. The most unusual case involved student Ralph Parse at Moody Bible Institute. In 1934, Parse admitted that he was a socialist, but to the consternation of the MBI, or the Moody Bible Institute community, Parse insisted that there was no conflict between his political beliefs and the doctrinal platform of the Bible Institute. It's a weird thing to think. But I'm on Ralph's side here.
Yeah. He's pulling that evangelical Thomas Haggerty move.
I've been there, Ralph, and I know what you're doing, and I support you. Parse's evangelical socialism put the MBI administration in a pickle. On the one hand, faculty leaders were concerned that harboring an openly socialist student would wreck MBI's carefully built reputation as a citadel of unyielding fundamentalism. On the other hand, teachers worried about establishing a precedent for vetting students merely on the basis of their political beliefs. In the end, the faculty voted to let Parse remain, but only with a razor-thin one-vote majority. There's more to the story that's really interesting. Ralph Parse ends up leaving Moody Bible Institute before he finishes all of his classes, which, I mean, honestly, good for Ralph. That's what he did. I don't know what happens to Ralph later in his life. I like to think that he joined the Communist Party. That you know, that's what he did. That's what I want to believe in my heart of hearts. But I love this Ralph Parse story so much.
Me too.
It's just completely off the wall, I guess, is why I like it. But I think it's really funny because that's what happens in Christian schools sometimes. I mean, at least in my experience, right? Like you got these like extremely conservative students, and the school is known for being like a safe space to send your kids, right? If you're a Christian parent. But then every now and again, you have these like real wild ass kids who are like, yeah, and that's why I'm a socialist, because of Jesus. And then the school's like, what are we going to do about this? We can't kick them out. They're paying our tuition.
Products of that. Yeah. Comrade Ralph Parse, if he's your grandpa, please let us know. We will 100% send you some stickers.
I need to know.
That's all we can do.
I need to know everything about Ralph.
Yeah, gotta know everything about Ralph. We have tried to Google him. It's not a lot of leads. So if you know Ralph Parse personally, put us in touch. Just to continue this bad transition, I'll yank us back really quick to pull out one more anecdote that ties Moody to Haymarket. So there are a number of people involved in the Haymarket affair as kind of high-profile people, or like people who went on trial and were arrested after and everything else. One of them who went on trial and wasn't killed was a guy named Samuel Fielden. Fielden had been a Methodist pastor for a really long time and also a socialist at the same time that he was a pastor, but like over time he gave up his faith and nevertheless kind of obviously like maintained some kind of weird interest in like how Christianity was developing. I mean, that's pretty common of that time, I guess. But there's a really, really fascinating story that Fielden tells in his autobiography about meeting D.L. Moody. And I'll read it really quickly. Oh, I should add, okay, so Fielden was one of the people put on trial. He was also the person speaking when the bomb went off in Haymarket. So like, you know, right there, ground zero. Anyway, so this is obviously before the Haymarket affair, but here's a really funny story that Fielden tells. So he says, after he became what he describes as a freethinker, he says, I visited Farwell Hall where I heard the since world-renowned Dwight L Moody. On reaching home, I indited a letter to Mr. Moody, and in a few days I received an answer in which he informed me that he would like to see me. On the following Sunday evening, I went again to Farwell Hall and heard Mr. Moody refer to the letter he had received during the week. After the service was over, and as Mr. Moody was going down below to gather in the spiritually wounded, I tapped him on the shoulder and informed him that I was the guilty wretch that had written the letter to him. He tried to get me to go downstairs with him, but I declined, and he informed me that he would talk with me at the Illinois Street Mission the next night. Well, I went there, and soon after my arrival, an honest-looking fellow got upon the floor, and during his remarks referred to the rascality of the methods of business, concluding by expressing the opinion that no businessman could be a Christian. A young stripling, evidently of the genus counterjumper, then rose to his feet and informed the audience that he was a Christian and a businessman, and went on to dilate upon the virtues of businessmen and their piety until I was thoroughly convinced that all a man needed to do in this world in order to make his calling and election sure in the next was to sell for $1 what only cost 15 cents. This little speech seemed to relieve the audience greatly, which had undoubtedly been very much discomposed by the speech of the common and ordinary-looking man who had preceded him. At last the meeting came to a close, and I moved up toward the stove and presented myself to Mr. Moody. We sat down. We had quite a good and at times animated conversation for perhaps an hour and a half, when I thought that it was about time for my opponent to be convinced, and when Mr. Moody thought the same about me, so that we had each moved out to meet the starlight. I think Mr. Moody will remember this occurrence, and I will say that there was nothing said on either side that would or did hurt the feelings of the other. We parted at the door with the best feeling toward each other. I'm only sorry to say that my opponent has persisted in following the wrong path to this day. I'm truly sorry for him. I only wish that we both turned to the right before it is everlastingly too late. That's the end of his story. But it's fascinating because, first of all, it really crystallizes everything we've been saying, right? There's this kind of like class war within Christianity already, and Moody is like seeing it in front of him even after he does these revival meetings or whatever. On the other hand, how wild is it that like the guy who was there when the bomb went off in Haymarket was also like hanging out with Dwight L Moody, trying to convince him to be an atheist and a socialist. It's just like a crazy time.
It is a crazy time. Ugh. Imagine if he would have won and converted D.L. Moody. Would have been wild.
No kidding. I know.
That's the alternate timeline I would like to live in.
Yeah, in a parallel universe, D.L. Moody is one more Haymarket martyr.
Instead, he's just a shit.
All right, so I think we can maybe round this May Day conversation out, talking about a little bit about how evangelicals maybe understand the working class and the poor, and thinking about how we might understand that relationship differently as Christian folks. We've been talking a bit about evangelicals having this paternalistic relationship toward the poor and the working class, seeing them as like in need of special instruction or special help. And you see that in Moody. You see it repeated in people like Billy Graham. You see it repeated in, Jerry Falwell or Franklin Graham today, or whoever you might kind of pick your evangelical. But I think it's really important to remember that like there are Christian reasons for people to cozy up to business, and there are like Christian reasons that people have found to oppose that very kind of association. And like figuring out how to intervene in that sort of fundamental contradiction is the challenge of the Christian left today. Like trying to sort out where is the class struggle and how can Christians push it in one direction over the other, understanding all that historical weirdness.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think we need to make a few provisions here too, because it's not like the findings of this deep dive into Moody map so well onto the contemporary situation. Like, you know, this, first of all, like there are tons of working class people who do subscribe to a real strict type of fundamentalism or evangelicalism. But like, it's important to note that like there's a lot of racial politics tied up in that too. Like a lot of white evangelicalism, right? That's kind of what we're talking about here. So there's that. But I think you're right still that like this is a place where Christians on the left can intervene into the larger Christian discourse, and to the extent that people are willing to listen to you talk about socialism and Jesus, which is, unlikely. but yeah, I think it's worth kind of thinking through like how do we do that? Like there are, I think so much of like my own family, I guess. Dean, I'm sure you're in the same boat too, right? But like, my family is extremely evangelical. It's also, pretty working class for the most part. I mean, whatever. But it would be a hard thing to convince them, I think, of this point. But it's still like super necessary thing to do. Drawing out that like, I don't know, you're a working class person, like don't listen to these people who are telling you to change your life and like, do this certain type of Christian work. I think it's such garbage, but it's an important conversation to have, but it's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. It's hard because the one thing that Moody is right about is that if you say that all you're going to do is like be a good person and get a job and all that kind of stuff, your life might not change automatically, but like people will be nicer to you.
That's true. Yeah, if you are mean about your boss and you're outraged about how little they're paying you, people will not be nice to you. That is one thing I've learned a lot.
Yeah. I think it's just helpful to recognize that all right, like May Day is a real rupture in history, I think. I want to say, yeah, well, Eric Hobsbawm, who's a Marxist historian, he said once that May Day is the only time that like a secular event has made its way into like the calendar in a significant way. And, that's like probably true, I think. I mean, there are other holidays too, like 4th of July and all that kind of stuff. But like there's something unique about May Day as a kind of global, like important event that's celebrated around the world. And I think it's like important to recognize that there are Christian pieces of that story. We've talked about the positives in the past, like there were Christians who supported all that kind of stuff and Christians who were into the Haymarket martyrs, and there's even some faith backgrounds among the Haymarket martyrs themselves. But it's also important to recognize that like the May Day event is also a maybe not a rupture within Christianity, but a catalyzing moment for like conservative Christianity to take off. And, on May Day, if you're a Christian, you should celebrate the working class. You should find examples of Christians who are really into it and doing the good work. And you should also like take a minute and figure out how Christianity is still wrapped up in all this ideological reproduction and figure out how to sabotage it from the inside, if that's where you find yourself.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. There's a ton of people going on strike this May Day, so light a candle for them or pray for them or whatever. And call their boss and tell them to eat a butt. You can always do that, man. When strikes are going on, you can always call someone's boss and tell them to eat a butt. It's a tactic, and you can do it. And I just want to put that out there in the world.
That's great. There you have it. That's the Magnificast strategy for this May Day.
On this May Day, holiest of days, tell someone's boss to eat a butt. Tell your own boss. I don't know. It's good though. I mean, support workers, because if you don't, the Christian right will just co-opt them, and that's not what you want.
Yeah, it's not. It's the last thing you want.
Yep. Well, this has been a real, I think, it's been a fun episode for me because I get to kind of drop a whole lot of weird things I know about the Moody Bible Institute on our listeners. But I think it's a good episode because it tells you some context you needed to know about labor and Christianity and evangelicalism. So there you go. There you have it. It's all here in front of you, laid out before you.
That's perfect. Just like we've had some brutal transitions, this is a perfect brutal ending, I think.
It's just stopping now. The podcast is over.
It's over. Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, especially that extremely brutal ending, you can support us on patreon.com/the Magnificast, where you can also find all kinds of other stuff. You can find some episodes we've done about a TV show called Damnation. You can find some stuff about current events. It's all there, and it's all for you if you support us with your bucks. You can follow us on Twitter at the Magnificast. You can send us an email at themagnificast@gmail.com, and you can join our Facebook group, the Magnificast Basement. Our music, as always, is by Amoria Armstrong, and our outro is by the Illogical Spoon. See you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord.